to everybody for being here, and I want to thank all of you for your obvious interest in this very, very important issue. Just as before we started, Colin told me I'd be getting to go first, which I hadn't quite planned for. And so I want to start just by saying that, I only have 2 minutes, that I accept as a given the very compelling cases that have been made over the last few years about the health and economic costs of coal production, not only in Alberta, but across the country. So there's been some really excellent research done there, but I don't want to take time going over that right now, but just simply to say that I accept that as a given. The NDP caucus is of the view that we need to adopt an aggressive policy towards eliminating coal production and reliance on coal as a mechanism of generating our electricity in Alberta. We need to do it for at least 3 reasons. First of all, and often underestimated, is the actual impact on our physical environment of coal production. We just recently saw probably the largest or second largest coal spill into the Athabasca River a couple of months ago. And we know that the cost of cleaning that up could be anywhere from $50 to $150 million, and that's probably a conservative estimate. And the long-term implications to the environment as a result of that are immeasurable at this point. Obviously, there's also been, as I just referenced, compelling, tremendously compelling evidence offered up as to the negative impact on health. And then the final thing, of course, is that we are a province that is producing a remarkable amount of carbon. And if we are going to go to the rest of the country and the rest of the world to request social license for the production and the growth of the oil sands, because it's such an economic, that's only already 2 minutes. Let me finish the sentence. Such an economic driver in this province and in this country, it seems to me that there is no good reason for us to coincidentally at the same time tie ourselves to an electricity production mechanism that is the dirtiest in the country and
Thank
in
you,
the world.
Rachel.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. The second speaker is Mr. Joe Anglin of Wildrose. We'll take your 2 minutes then, to be fair to everybody.
Thank you very much, and I don't know if I can fill 2 minutes, but I'm going to try to at least take up some time. I'm not going to get into the medical and even many of the environmental aspects, because one is I'm not questioning any of the data that is presented scientifically. What I am going to do is tell you this, that as the Wildrose critic and as the Wildrose caucus, we absolutely support the decommissioning of the coal plants on a number of levels, or for a number of reasons. Environmental concerns are one, and health concerns are another. Now those are the top 2. There are also efficiency reasons. Coal isn't all that efficient. So there is a federal program underway to accelerate the decommissioning of these plants. We support that. It was unfortunate we actually had Sundance A, which is Sundance 1 and 2, who actually applied to decommission and to take down their, to disassemble their generators, and they were forced to actually reinvest and put their generators back online. And unfortunately, they also were not held to the newer standards when that was brought forward. So that set us back a little bit. But how do we replace it? That's really the key. So the Wildrose platform is to really to introduce a natural gas and a hydroelectric policy to deal with this. And only on the baseload side. I mean, that's primary, because a big part of this has to be the renewable energies. How do we get there? How do we invite more investments in renewable energy to supplement and advance what we want to do? Those are the major questions. So what we support is a distributed generation model with an internet-type grid. And with that, there's a lot of questions you may have, and I will finish before my 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joe. Well done. The third in the line will be Dr. David Swann.
Thank you very much, Colin. Thanks, everyone, for being here, and for the hosts and organizers, the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, the Alberta Lung Association, the Alberta, what other association was it?
EcoPath.
EcoPath. Thank you so much. As a physician and politician and grandfather in Alberta, I'm deeply concerned of the inadequate response of this government to the crisis of climate change and coal-related health impacts. Coal has had its day. It's time to move to cleaner technology along with greater investment in renewables and energy conservation. We have seen no real leadership on alternative energy in this province. We are the highest user of carbon fuels and carbon emissions per capita in Canada. And there we have a strong economic and environmental case for phasing out coal for all purposes where alternatives exist. A welcome side benefit, of course, would be Alberta's reputation, nationally and internationally, for placing health and the environment high on the priority list of Albertans' values. Another win, of course, for Alberta would be broadening our industry base, and conservation and renewables would be key to a new energy and employment future for Alberta. Failure of this government to act so far could have something to do with the top 3 coal power plants and generators in this province donating $136,000 to this provincial Conservative Party since 2007. Yes, provincial corporations can still give up to $30,000 in an election year to any particular party. Of course, the board members and employees of these corporations are free to give similar amounts, which the public cannot clearly identify as connected to the coal industry. My experience is that 2 things are needed for change. One is turning on the light for legislators at all 3 levels, municipal, provincial, and federal, to say we care about this issue, we want to see change. And the second thing is turning up the heat, threatening the credibility of your elected representatives and government if they fail to act in our long-term public interest. I'm here to talk about both and welcome your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much for being on time too. Finally, the book in the series is the Honourable Donna Kennedy-Glans, please.
Thank you very much, and thanks again to the hosts. This is a very, very important conversation. I am actually very grateful to be here with my colleagues to talk about this. We come from different political parties, and we probably have different starting points, but I don't think there's any one of us who doesn't care about coal and doesn't agree that we need to do something. I have the pleasure of actually working with 2 of these gentlemen here on an all-party committee on resource stewardship, and we have looked at hydroelectricity, we've looked at gas, and it was quite a delight for me to be named the Associate Minister responsible for alternatives and renewables and electricity. I do not have my mandate letter yet, but why would you name somebody the Associate Minister of Electricity and Alternatives and Renewables if you didn't have a very strong vision in mind? I come from a farm in southern Ontario that was expropriated by Ontario Hydro for a 500 kV transmission line. So this is very personal. I understand the situation in Ontario very, very well. I also understand what we have here in Alberta, and I think we're blessed. We have sunshine, we have a lot of wind, we have natural gas that right now is relatively cheap and accessible. We have an industrial base that does cogeneration and creates electricity as a byproduct. We are committed to doing something to reduce coal. We're a market-based environment. We have to do this in a way that means that the lights don't go off. And that's what I care about, is making sure that we approach how we decommission coal in this province as a base for electricity in a way that makes sense, economically, socially, environmentally. And I think we have to keep all 3 of those in mind at all times. So I look forward to this conversation.
Thanks very much, and thanks for keeping on time too. Okay, so we now enter the second phase, and I would like to ask questions based on what I've heard. From the parties, and again, just to remind each of the panelists, I'd like each of you to have a stab at it. I'll keep my questions as brief as possible, and if your answer's short, I'd appreciate it. So, from your party's perspective, in turn, perhaps we can even go in order from the speakers, the lineup of speakers. So, Rachel first, if you want to speak. In whose best interest does your party actually operate? Is it to serve the public? Is it to serve the corporate sponsors? Is it to serve the country? Is it to serve the world? Did you tell?
Just me. That's a bit of a loaded question. Obviously, in my view, I think we have a problem in Alberta in that with 40 plus years of conservative government, we have a governing party, with all due respect, that has lost its way, that has misinterpreted its obligation, whereas it is government's role to represent the public interests of the electorate to all those agencies and stakeholders who have impacts on the overall best interests of the province. I believe that what's happened instead is this government has adopted the position of representing the interests of some of those stakeholders to the public. And they've actually sort of turned into a communications arm of TAP and TransAlta and certain vested industrial and commercial and economic interests in this province. And I think there's no place where that is more clear than on the environmental file as a whole, not just talking about coal, but talking about the development of the oil and gas industry across the province. Albertans need jobs, they need a healthy economy. They also need clean air, clean land, clean water. They also need a government that governs not only for today, but for tomorrow. They need a government that's not simply measuring success on the basis of how much money a small group of corporations are able to pay out to their shareholders on an annual basis. And unfortunately, that seems to be the criteria that the current government's operating on.
Thank you. Next.
The average constituent of mine is a blue-collar, either farmer or lunch bucket kind of employee, wage-earning employee. Their interest is inextricably linked to the interest of all Albertans, the public interest. They are the public interest of Alberta. You can't separate that from the public interest of Canada, and you can't separate that from the public interest of humanity. We can debate all the competition between the various factions, but public interest is the public interest. It's interesting you posed the question because I didn't think of this the other day. I actually posted on my Facebook page, and some of you are welcome to look at it, because we have been accused of being, and other parties have been accused of being puppets of industry. I welcome you to look at my Facebook page. I have a habit of speaking out and saying what I think on the environment, and I went after Imperial Oil and CNRL on my Facebook page, which I think in the public interest we have to be responsible and consistent, and we have to apply our rules and regulations fairly and justly to everyone. So,
Thanks, Jim.
I define politics as negotiating the public interest, and the Alberta Liberals are very conscious of trying to connect with Albertans, connect them with the issues that matter to the long-term well-being of this planet, as well as the individuals there. From the perspective of long-term well-being from a health point of view, economic point of view, employment, new opportunities in careers and development, there is no question that the renewable energy industry has far more to offer our long-term future than coal. So the question I think we as citizens need to ask our members of the legislature in this case, because energy is a provincial matter, is who are you acting for? The long-term well-being of this planet clearly has to do with reducing carbon, increasing research and development in renewables and conservation, and energy-efficient technology. If we're not moving in that direction very aggressively, what are we doing as the most wealthy province in this country and the most carbon-intensive per capita on the planet, which Alberta is? So again, I want to come back to my key message. Citizens are responsible for both turning on the light and turning up the heat on their member of the legislature. If you want to see something different done, the only way that's going to happen is if MLAs and ultimately the minister, this associate minister, feel the pressure to change the direction of this province in energy.
Thank you, Dan. Donna, please.
Thank you. It's an easy answer. It's the public. It's the Albertan. All Albertans. We're in a market-based environment for electricity here in Alberta, which is very unique from the rest of the country. And actually, it's unique in North America. This government doesn't go out and build and put on taxpayers' expense hydroelectric dams, nuclear facilities like other jurisdictions do. we invite the private sector to come in and generate electricity in a way that the consumer wants. So for example, I'm from the city of Calgary. We have wind energy that actually fuels our light rail transit system. For example, Catholic school boards create a conglomeration, bid on a wind energy project. They have the capacity to do that in this province. People in Alberta want to make their own choices. They want an electricity system that is resilient, that's cost-effective, that's environmentally friendly, and they want choices. And one of the things, I spent my Christmas holiday reading about electricity, which is very, very interesting. It's fascinating, actually. I read quite a bit, but I spent a lot of time to dig deep. And one of the things that keeps coming up is consumer choice. And I think it's very, very powerful. And that gets back to Albertans, which I think this is all about.
Is there a chance for rebut here?
We haven't built that in. Could
I think you should build it in.
It could turn into a free-for-all.
You don't think I should have spent my Christmas holidays reading more?
Let me go with a few questions, because we do have 25 minutes coming up where there will be additional questions, and maybe before that begins we can have just a brief rebut, if that is possible. Okay?
It's not brief.
To save a bit of time, instead of each of the four of you going through each of my questions, let me perhaps target a question and then perhaps have one of you who indicates to me that you feel urgently the need to rebut the opportunity to do so. So this question then would be perhaps for Donna. Okay? What timeline could you see as being practical for the coal phase-out in the province of Alberta?
I think we already have a timeline that's been dictated by the federal government, and we've been negotiating with the federal government. One of the things that we have to pay attention to is making sure we have a resilient system. So if all of our coal-fired plants decide to go off in the next 10 years, and again, these are owned by the private sector, we've got a problem. All of us have a problem, because the lights will go out. And I'm not fear-mongering, that's just reality. So it's in all of our best interests to make sure that we have a conversation, and it's very transparent, about how that change is going to happen. There are people who believe that you can do clean coal, and that you can actually get, and the Genesee plant's an example, coal to a place where it's on a par, on a GHG basis, with gas cogeneration. Is that something that's appropriate, or is that just off the list? And I think that's a conversation we need to have. We are a province that in 1992, 81% of our electricity came from coal. It's now 52%. Yes, we all want to reduce that, but if we turn all those plants off in the next 10 years, we have to be able to fill that gap. I don't think that makes good sense.
Okay. Joe, you had put up your hand.
Yeah, the timeline itself, mandated by the federal government, is one timeline. It's unfortunate because we can actually accelerate that even using market mechanisms. I use the Sundance A as an example. The market itself wanted to decommission the plants, and we forced them back online. That doesn't make sense to me. There are other ways to also accelerate that timeline, and the ways to do that is to find alternatives on the base load. That's really it, because coal powers the base load. And by the way, it's great to say that it makes up 52% or 62% of our generation capacity, but when that generation makes up 80 and 90% of the load on any given merit order, that's what it does. And oh, by the way, we still burn those generators. They're still burning when they're not even being utilized. We don't shut them off. So it is an issue. So we need to use all the tools available to efficiently make this transition. And that can be accelerated. I really believe there's that possibility out there. And so does my caucus.
Okay, well, we've got two people wanting to rebut.
We always will.
Could you do your rebuttal in 30 seconds?
I can.
Please,
I
please.
promise I will.
Just make your, and the same for you, Dave.
I will say that if we use the federal laws as a guideline, then we've lost the battle. The federal laws are of no assistance. We have the capacity as a province to actually deal with this issue and to make it happen faster. I'm not an expert. 15 years, 10 years, Alberta is unique, and there's a long list of reasons why it is. But if we don't start by rejecting the federal government's plan, then we're not even caring about this issue. We just basically filed the issue in the back and decided not to deal with it. That's what I believe.
Thank you. And David?
This government has decided to deregulate electricity. They've decided the market should determine how we develop our energy in this province. At the same time, they have subsidized this fossil fuel industry for 50 years. I think it's fair to say it's time to start subsidizing, if that's the term to use, alternative energies, clean energy, conservation in our homes and businesses. Let's create a level playing field for what we know is much healthier and much more sustainable in the long term.
Thank you, David. Okay, now I have another question. I have several, but we're not going to have time to go through all of them. This may be my last one as a function of how long the answers take. Now, we talk a lot about the market, and certainly from what I know, economists tend in their models to treat anything beyond their narrow interests as externalities. How does your party's position understand these externalities, and would you prefer that in costing out any proposed change in energy options or balances, that a more holistic examination be considered, one that internalizes the broader ramifications and effects into a full cost accounting model? So David, you had your hand up first, would you like to go?
Well, thank you. The Penman Institute has done a wonderful analysis just in Alberta based on some of the extensive research in Ontario that looked at the healthcare costs alone of the coal industry. $300 million a year is estimated for Alberta's healthcare costs. Edmonton has about 50 to 60% more asthma than Calgary. Why is that? When we just happen to be downwind of the major coal-fired power plants in Edmonton. We know that hundreds of thousands of lives are lost every year on a planetary basis because of coal burning. Much poorer quality coal and much poorer standards, of course, in other countries. But we're losing thousands of people every year in Canada based on coal emissions and other pollutants. It's time we looked at externalities, put a valid price on them, and recognize that these should be incorporated in the cost of a kilowatt hour. Environmental impacts, climate impacts, as Rachel mentioned, the coal mining problems and the leaching into the North Saskatchewan River, huge costs. When are we going to start including the real cost of producing the energy we're producing?
Thank you, David. Donna, you a brief rebuttal. Please.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I just wanted to comment on the externalities. People care a great deal about different things. A lot of people in this room are science-based, and you will have different confidences in different externalities than other disciplines may have. The consumer needs to be educated. And personally, I think that's a very, very important part of my mandate going forward, is to make sure that the public has access to the information. Most people don't know where our electricity comes from in Alberta. And one of the best pieces of advice somebody gave me, and a lot of you are younger in this room, there's an app called Megawatts that you can download for 99 cents, and it will tell you where electricity comes from in Alberta at any given moment. I am addicted to this app, and right now, 52.6% of our generation in Alberta is coming from coal, 8.4% is coming from wind, 34.1% is coming from gas, 2.3% from hydro, and 2.5% from biomass. And I am totally addicted to this thing. It's a way to communicate to people where our electricity comes from. Because if you ask people in the public who aren't sitting in this room and care about these issues, they don't know, and I think that's a big, big responsibility for all of us.
Thanks, Donna. Joe, would you go?
Oh, I thought Rachel was going before.
Oh, Rachel, wait.
Well, a couple of points. First of all, I just need to say, as New Democrat, it's been a long-standing position that even using the term externalities to exclude consideration of important issues when you're talking about, economic health, community health is kind of frustrating to me, because, it's not an economic model if people are getting poisoned while you're doing it. And it's not an externality if people are getting poisoned while you're doing it. So that's just the way it is. But that being said, I need to say I'm a bit frustrated by this concept refrain that we have to put it back on the consumer. We have a deregulated market in this province. It is unique. Consumers have less choice in it. We've had to constantly intervene because the deregulated market's not working the way it should. We have a market with too few players, so they're able to manipulate the market. And we also have a market as another one of its unique components that actually works against the free market development of renewable energy, because it's so variable that renewable energy companies cannot get the financing that they would do in order to break in to an otherwise very established, very dominated, almost anti-competitive, monopolized market, which is really not free at all. So I don't like the use of the word the free market. It's misleading. We've created a bit of a broken market, and it is one that actually works against the otherwise free market development of renewable energy. And so that's something that this government has to take responsibility for. It's their unique creation, and it is their unique barrier to the development of alternatives in this province.
Thank you. Okay, one last question from me.
No, I get
I'm
to
sorry. Sorry.
Well, the whole issue of externalities, if you believe in having a social license, which the Wildrose does, you have to consider the externalities without question. But I want to go after this deregulated market phenomenon. One, it's not deregulated. Some people need to wake up, and I really find it problematic to put this on consumers to try to figure it out. Distribution, transmission are fully regulated because they have to be. Generation is supposed to be deregulated, except our big coal plants have power purchase agreements which guarantees them a cost recovery and cash flow. Well, that has nothing to do with the market or any type of competitiveness. It gives them an advantage over other options. Oh, by the way, our own Alberta Utilities Commission under the ECHA changed the rules to actually cause problems or throw roadblocks to allow wind power to get onto the system. So we work against ourselves dealing with some of the renewables. So we're dealing with this issue. So what is a competitive free? Well, let's look at the retail side. We have an RRO, regulated rate option, that has different rules and market mechanisms than the private retailers are allowed to utilize. So they can raise the costs, or actually they're forced to raise the costs. This doesn't make sense. So we're going to ask the consumer now to get educated, because that's what industries tell them. Our government is, you've got to get those consumers educated. But I will tell you this, our own market surveillance administrator even calls the market an oligopoly, because they're manipulating the system. And they've been caught not once, not twice, not 3 times. My goodness, we're starting to lose count. We got a real problem in this industry. If we want to clean it up, we got a problem in the market, and we got a problem in the way we manage it.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you. And now I'll ask one last question, and it will come from a science point of view. As I understand it, there was a study conducted in Wabamun area, and this study is science, it claims to be solid science. And I've heard at least 3 of you appeal to the science that you're not contesting, and you say that we do need to move away from coal. Donna, I'm not sure if I heard you correctly, but I'm not sure if you support all the science and what you say about the Wabamun study. So if I could put this question to you, I understand that this particular study is one that people who want to see the continued role of coal lean on very heavily, because it showed that there are no health effects from coal emissions.
I am familiar with the study. My understanding it was conducted in 2006 by Alberta Health. It was to look at airborne contaminants in the Wabamun area, an area that's probably closest to the most densest area of coal-fired power plants. The study did not find evidence of higher deaths as a result of respiratory illness, asthma, or bronchitis, and it was a study conducted by scientists. Now, we did this review in the spring in Calgary, and I went and talked to scientists and physicians who have expertise in asthma. I really care about this. This isn't just a piece of rhetoric for me. And I asked them what they thought about the research, and I have in this binder about 5 different examples of studies. Now, I'm not going to say that the research doesn't bear this out. I'm not going to do that game. We need to deal with coal. We will deal with coal. But to demonize our history because we happen to be a jurisdiction that did coal when other people built hydroelectricity and did nuclear seems just a little bit revisionist in history. So I have no problem talking about science, and I am really delighted that we've got a joint monitoring agency in place, and that we have targets, and that we are committed to transparency, and I think that's absolutely essential. And I'm not going to say that one study is absolutely right and one study is absolutely wrong. This is a conversation we need to have.
Okay, so just to make it clear then, from my point of view as a scientist, as an applied scientist, that no one study demonstrates anything on its own, and perhaps that study is so fatally flawed that perhaps you shouldn't be paying any attention to it at all. It's a possibility that I'd just like you to consider, all of us to consider.
I think we could say that about just about anything, but I don't think the study you're referring to is facially flawed based on my understanding of it.
Well, perhaps we need to have an offline meeting on that. Rachel, you had your hand up, said.
Well, first of all, the joint monitoring system that we have set up is not dealing with monitoring around emissions from coal plants. That's focused on the oil sands, so it's an entirely different thing. John is quite right that there's a lot of differences of opinion out there in the science world. For instance, the World Health Organization has set out air quality limits that I believe are about a quarter of what the Alberta government currently has in place. So the World Health Organization would have us drop our allowable limits on certain chemicals which are produced through coal production by 75%. So clearly there's a difference between us on one hand and the World Health Organization on the other. I like to think that the World Health Organization is probably operating on the basis of the preponderance of evidence and the best evidence. And so I would suggest that we are, as a province, already a bit of an outlier, and to then reach out to other studies that are even further outliers is part of an age-old process, whether you're talking about convincing people that cigarettes are bad for you, or whether you're now talking about convincing the Alberta government that coal is probably not so great either. It's always the first thing is to find one person that disagrees with your thesis and then use that to claim uncertainty for a long period of time. At the end of the day, it comes down to this: political will. Either the political will is there or it's not. And I'm afraid that as things stand now with this current government, the political will is not there.
Thank you. Joe, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, now...
Please try to keep it short.
Oh, I will. I'll be shorter than Rachel, honestly. I'm not familiar with that study. You caught me off guard, and I'm somewhat embarrassed by even hearing this, because the science surrounding coal that goes back quite a long time. I'll use the Harvard Six City study, which some of you scientists are fully aware of. It's ongoing. It's consistently being worked on. There's others. There's no question that this is not healthy to burn coal. I've not heard anyone ever question that. So that to me is frustrating, because going back to the Obed coal mine spill, first thing we had the minister say was, not a problem. It's like, what do you mean not a problem? It's toxic waste that's gone into the river. That's a problem. Now, how bad is it? That's a different issue. But you just can't say it's not an issue. The fact is, I think the science is well established. About a 10 micron increase in particulate matter is extremely dangerous for every 10 micron increase. Now, how you take that exponentially, I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but the idea that somebody wrote a paper saying that burning coal that's going to come downwind to Edmonton is not going to be harmful, that's illogical. That doesn't make sense.
Thank you, Joe. David, did you want to comment?
Well, first of all, let me thank Donna Kennedy-Glans, and I'm for one, I'm very glad she's in the position she's in. She's thoughtful, she's educated, she doesn't mind challenging the status quo, and I think she has taken on the first position that I've seen this government take towards even mentioning renewables in the same sentence as policy change. Previous energy ministers I've talked to don't want to talk about renewables. It's just a peripheral issue. So I'm very pleased Donna's there. I'm pleased she's talking about the end of coal, because she's recognizing that we can't revise history. We've built this on hydrocarbons, and we have to start making some different decisions. And hopefully we're going to do it in a way that's not going to kill our economy and kill too many more people, because the evidence is very clear. The science is very clear. We are killing hundreds of thousands of people on the planet every year from coal. It's mining, it's transportation, it's burning. It's just a fact. So the question is, how fast can we do it? And how committed is this government to making those steps? And I can tell you that the speed at which this government moves is entirely dependent on the electorate. If they don't see public support for change, for moving towards renewables, conservation, phasing out coal, they are not going to move. Because the market is going to say, we are the cheapest form of energy, just suck it up. So if you care about this, you must talk to your MLA, you must write to your MLA, you must write to the minister, you must take this seriously for your health, your children's health, for our economic future, for jobs. The answer is very clear. We need leadership from this government, and frankly, I'm very hopeful that Donna is going to help us move in that direction.
Thank you very much, David. Well, please join me in thanking the panelists for this initial day. Another 20 minutes of your time to please answer questions from the floor. So if there are any people who would like to pose a question that I haven't yet posed, targeted at any one of the panelists or all of them, and if you could please keep your question short, there's a mic on that end and a mic in the middle. Please line up, and that will give me a sense of how much time to allow if the answers go on longer than they should or the questions go on. So I'll shut up now. Over to you, please.
Thank you.
Could you tell us who you are?
Sam Gunch. To the Minister, before we get coal phased out, say over the next 10 years, my question is about electricity export out of Alberta. If Alberta's coal power generators have capacity to produce electricity that's in excess of Alberta's needs, should your government's policies support export of coal-fired electricity to the USA? Specifically things like the transmission and distribution charges on our utility bills that are paying for SNC allowing them to build power lines that we get the lease back from them. Should your government continue or do any policies to support export of coal-fired electricity to the U.S.?
It's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. The 500 kV line that goes through my parents' former family farm exports from the Bruce nuclear power down to the United States. And when, at some points in time, Ontario taxpayers have to actually pay to have the Americans take that electricity. That's the way electricity works. This little gadget that I was telling you about, megawatts, I am really addicted to it, actually has on it the intertie. It will show you a graphic of whether electricity is coming in or out of Alberta, from the Montana tie line, from Saskatchewan, or from BC. And frankly, the capacity on those lines isn't as great as it is in many other jurisdictions. If you look at that thing very long, you'll realize that most of the energy is coming into Alberta from those other jurisdictions and not going out the other way. It's part of our balancing. We need that. I don't see anybody looking at creating electricity in Alberta for export.
Thank you, Joe.
I just want to refer you to the California Northwest study published by our own ASO in 2006 explaining why we're building these lines and why we're doing it for export. One is, and this is wrong, the public should not be subsidizing the industry for this type of export at all. That was not the deal under the deregulation agreement. It was part of policy. The public would not subsidize it, and now we're subsidizing it. Second, when you take a look at the favorite app after midnight, what you will notice is that the transmission system between Edmonton and Calgary is actually experiencing congestion, because that's when our coal generation really turns it up at that hour to go down to the United States, and it's BC Hydro who's actually buying and selling that. So what we're doing is we're actually subsidizing BC Hydro. We buy that hydro in during the day, it's rather cheap, and BC Hydro comes in and purchases about 3 cents a kilowatt from our coal generating plants after midnight, and you can see the lines light up as we're selling down into the California market, and it's all part of the ASO record. Go check it out.
Thank you, John. Okay. Second question, please.
Yes, my name is David Spink. I think my question is for you, Minister. But I think I'm hearing that there is general agreement that we need to look at phasing out coal-fired power plant generation in the province on an expedited basis. And We have one timeline that's set by the CO2 regulations that the federal government has enacted. But how do we make this happen? If we have general agreement amongst the various parties that it's a good idea, how do we make it happen?
In a market-based environment, we have to actually create the conditions for the market to allow that to happen. And some of the mythology has been that intermittent power, like wind, cannot be integrated into a system like ours. And that's been around, that thinking has been around for a while. I think the potential of wind and solar is much greater in Alberta, and we've proven it. We've got 8% capacity for wind power built in. And ASO, I know my colleague here is a bit critical, and I think I will take him to task on some of the facts he just shared. But ASO has proven, demonstrated to us, we have confidence in, which matters to everybody, that we have confidence in our electricity system, that we can actually integrate intermittent energy into the system that we've got. That's a confidence builder. And back to the public, and I know some of my colleagues here are a little bit critical of the consumer being the driver here, but in a market-based electricity system, we do have to pay attention to the consumer. And if the consumer can see, Catholic school boards can see that this is possible, then I think we'll have increasing confidence. Our biggest challenge is natural gas prices and what we do with how much we sign up for cogen and natural gas. And I think that's actually the biggest question going forward as we do a phase out of coal.
Thank you. Did you want to answer?
Well, just a couple of points. I mean, I think one of the things is, I guess I kind of take a little bit of issue with your preliminary statement, because the minister's talking with reference to the federal guidelines and the federal regulations. And if that ends up being the driving force, then we have coal plants that will continue to function for 50 years. So we're not that, if that's what...
I'm trying to underestimate, be conservative.
Pardon? Yeah, exactly. So the problem is that the federal government does not actually have a regulatory regime in place that will bring about any kind of phase out other than through extinction in the near future. And indeed, right now we've got a new plant that people out at the, what's it called, the Notley 2 plant, which would propose to produce another 500 megawatts. And that's currently being considered by this government. And quite frankly, if you're really looking at phasing out coal, presumably you would start by saying, you know what, let's not entertain any new coal plant applications right now. But we haven't even got to that point with them. So I think that the concern that we have is that there really is no stated intention by this provincial government to try to phase out coal. And as long as we have these sort of vague kind of, oh, let the consumer work it out things, it's not going to happen. Ontario, as we know, decommissioned its last coal plant, or will decommission its last coal plant this year. And they're doing it many, many years ahead of what the federal government timeline would have had. Now, we're not Ontario, I understand that we have a much different regulatory system, we have a different, we have the unregulated market, we have a different portfolio of alternative energy at our disposal, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not suggesting that their model is laid out for us. What I am suggesting is that a government that is truly committed to phasing out coal within 10, 15, 20 years, whatever number they pick, will convene the appropriate people to have a transparent task force to map out the plan the same way Ontario did in the early 2000s. And look at things like efficiency, another thing we have the worst at in the country for which we had no plan. We'll look at how to promote renewable energy actively as opposed to passively. And then we'll also look at the issue of natural gas, which of course is an opportunity for us in the short term. But those are the things that happen when the government takes leadership. And we don't have that yet. We've been waiting 2 years. We promised a renewable energy framework in 2011. We don't have it yet. We've been promised energy efficiency frameworks for more than that. We still don't have it. And so it only happens, as Mike said, when the government understands that the public is not going to put up with the delay any longer.
Thank you. David?
Just a quick comment. Pollution pays in Alberta instead of polluters paying in Alberta. That has to change. That is a government policy that has to be addressed. And it will be addressed when people raise their voices and put pressure on their members to say, carbon is now a pollutant. There are a number of emissions that are causing damage to our acid levels in streams. We've made some progress on sulfur dioxide. There are clear particulate problems that are adding to asthma in this province. And there are policy options that we could be making, including a carbon fee, a policy that relates to paying the price for not only local damage, but global damage in terms of climate change.
Okay, what I'm going to do now, thank you, David. We have at least 5 or 6 people lined up to ask questions. We have about 8 minutes left to bring us to the first hour, and then I asked that we could go for another 10 minutes if we need to. But what I would like to ask is, could you ask your question, three of you at once, and then maybe you could deal with all 3 questions. If you wouldn't mind making notes, just so that all your questions would have been on the table, put on the table and heard. So could you please ask your question, and then you'll get the answer after 3 questions have been asked, if that's okay?
Very fast thinking on your feet. Okay, my question is, have any of the members of the panel been reading on the issue of replacing uranium with thorium as a much safer way in the extreme and long future of getting our electrical system to provide cheap and easy fuel? This would also apply to anybody in the audience who is interested in the discussion of that issue. Jerry Shaw is my name.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Hi,
Your name, please.
my name's Heather Workman. In the spirit of transparency, I'm wondering if there's an app where we can share all of the documents each one of you read so that we could all be on the same page to understand the concept. I'm but a simple person, and I would love to see all of the materials that each one of you are getting your information from so that I can become an informed citizen. Thank you.
Thank you. Third question, please.
My name is Dale Rowe. Just wanted to ask a few things, but Germany in 12 years went from a net importer of energy to a net exporter of energy in 12 years. So now they can power all of Canada with renewables alone. And they did that with less than half of the resources that Alberta has with wind and solar that we have here in this province. So Germany created a feed-in tariff model, building millions and millions of small business owners, basically, who create their own power and sell it back to the grid. Hence, keeping the money in the province instead of giving it to the big energy conglomerates and corporations out there, or sending it overseas to the shareholders, etc. So it is possible to phase out coal. And so who on the panel is going to endorse this type of model and promote and implement this?
Thank you, Dan. Great questions, all of you. So if I could just ask you to please be brief so that we can hear the last 3 and then close the session. Thank you. Who would like to have a stab at answering all 3 briefly, please? Sure. Thank you.
It's kind of like the genie in the 3 wishes here. The first question about uranium and thorium, I confess I have not, but I am interested in reading, so if you send me something, I will read it. The second question about information. If you're an economist, a lawyer, or an engineer, you are going to love this reading. And the health stuff's a little bit different, so it's a bit of a different flavor. The AUC, the ASO have volumes of publicly accessible information, and that's where I started. It's there. You can read 500-page reviews of smart grids. It's fantastic stuff. The question about Germany. Germany is a wonderful example of how this can be done. Germany's motivation is very, very different than Alberta's motivation. They did not have access to energy in the way that we do. They were concerned about that, and they needed to be self-sufficient. It's very admirable what they have done, and I think I've talked about this with Pemina. The feed-in tariff that Germany's done works. When they tried to do it in Ontario, it didn't work. So we have to learn from that. We really have to learn from that. That's my sense. There's some issues about that. In terms of microgeneration, it works in Alberta. We actually have a huge uptake in microgeneration. we have a sense that microgeneration can work. The regulation that's in place, been in place since 2009, allows microgeneration of 1 megawatt. There is increasingly an uptick on the use of that by consumers. Is it where we're going to end up? No. But is it giving us confidence that we can do it? And I would say yes. So I think places like Germany are things we should be looking at. Are we exactly the same? Are our motivations the same? I don't think so. Our starting points are different.
Thank you, Donna. Would any of the other panelists like to say something on any